Welcome again to another edition of Ozarks Voices. My name is Tom Peters, Dean of Libraries here at Missouri State University. Today's date is Wednesday, October 19th, 2016, and our special guest this afternoon is Leon Combs.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for being here. This is just a very relaxed interview, and we want to learn more about your life and your experiences here in the Ozarks. So let's begin with the tough question. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Forsyth, Missouri, which is in Taney County, a few miles from where I live now. And I did have kind of a twist on my life and how I ended up in Bradleyville. I was born there, and when I was about 20 months old, or a little younger, I was taken to Colorado Springs. Mm-hmm. This is during the Depression. I was born in 1935. In 1936, I was taken to Colorado Springs. My father had some real problems. He had been very successful in business, but then he got an alcohol problem and maybe a drug problem. Mm-hmm. On Christmas Eve, I think it was Christmas Eve 1936, he came home in Colorado Springs and shot and killed my mother and killed himself. Mm-hmm. And I was 20 months old, and my 13-year-old sister witnessed it. She said they fell on me and I was crying and so forth. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, that was that, and I had a much older sister who was married in California, so she took me to California with her husband and child, and they were going to adopt me. Mm-hmm. But they decided not to, and they were going to put me in an orphanage there. Mm-hmm. When back in Missouri, my mother's brother, my mother was a Combs, mm-hmm. my father was a Sloan, and my mother's brother said, they called him, they said, send the boy back, he just got married, he would take the baby. Mm-hmm. So an old lady brought me on the train from Sacramento to Springfield in the summer of 1937, and it's 50 miles to Bradleyville. The mailman took me from the train station to Bradleyville to my new parents. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I arrived in Bradleyville.
And you don't remember any of this?
Oh, of course not.
Too
no.
young.
I was 2 years old. I don't remember it, and I didn't even know it until, in fact, my father never really told me this, or my mother, until I was going to school here at that time, Southwest Missouri State University. Mm-hmm. I went my freshman year here, and I went home one dark December afternoon. My dad owned a little country store at Brown Branch, Missouri, mm-hmm. and it was almost dark, and he told me, he said, I think I need to tell you something. He said, when you were a baby, I worked for your dad and your mom, and your mother was my sister. And this is, meanwhile, there was no wood stove in the store. It was getting dark, and I was standing with my back to the stove, and he was over on the other side, mm-hmm. and he was kind of tearing up, and I was standing with my back to him, tearing up, because I love my dad, my mm-hmm. adopted father. Right. And he said, you know, this happened. I still think today, he said, I think that was an accident, what had happened. Well, of course, no one else thinks that, but he loved my real father. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he told me that, and I knew it because I had found out when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. The kids in school all knew about it because their parents had told them, and I found it out in a roundabout way. Right. But up until the day they died, my adopted parents, who were very wonderful parents to me, they had 3 children after they took me, and they never wanted to discuss it other than that one time. So yeah, that's kind of the dark part of my life. After that, I had a wonderful life in Bradleyville. I had a Tom Sawyer existence, where I swam and fished in Beaver Creek and squirrel hunted and played basketball and went to a little one-room school for 2 or 3 of my grades with one teacher and 8 grades, and then I went to Bradleyville School where in the middle of my junior year, we never had a gymnasium. We played basketball, or tried to play on outdoor courts, with mud and ice and snow or whatever. Yeah. Big wood backboards with hoops with no nets on them. And it was a big deal to go play a game because we never played a home game because no one would come play outside. So we'd go to Forsyth or Chadwick and play. And it was just really cool to go into a gymnasium and get to play on the floor. Of course, we always lost. We expected to lose, but it was really good to be there with nets on the hoops and so forth. So
the temperature was 70 degrees rather than 35 degrees.
Yeah, it was amazing. Then halfway through my junior year, the school superintendent got some local people to chip in, and I think he said they spent they had a $1,200 budget for a gym, but they got it up to $2,000. So with all the voluntary labor and so forth, they built an old gym with a concrete floor covered with tile, old-fashioned tile. Well, it was in the middle of a cold winter, and they could not get the tile properly stick down. We boys, I was on my hands and knees before they put the tile down with sand rocks, sanding the concrete, getting it smoothed out, and then we'd put blow torches in there and try to blow it, and so on. So we finally got it down, and our first game was with Spokane. And I remember playing that, and the ground was sort of, they had poured the concrete right on directly on the ground, so it was sweating, and that that tile became as slick as ice. It's like playing on an ice rink. And we actually, I think they called the game at halftime. It was so bad because there were people banging their heads and falling. It was terrible. So anyhow, we when I played 4 years basketball for Bradleyville, we lost every game we played except 2. We won 2 games, and Branson beat us one time 64-6.
Wow.
And when I wrote the book later on, I remembered that, but I thought, is this real? Am I remembering this correctly? And I came up here to the library and looked up the old newspapers, and there it was. It said one team scored one. I said, how did one guy scored more points than the entire team or something like that? But it did happen. So.
Yeah. Okay. So you grew up in Bradleyville. So you mentioned Beaver Creek. I'm pretty sure that Henry Schoolcraft went up Beaver Creek on his way up to the.
He was. I think he was at the mouth of Beaver Creek, at least at White River. I know. I've read the Schoolcraft journals, and I don't know that he came through Bradleyville, but I think at least he was at the mouth of Beaver Creek where it runs into the Great White River at that time, which is now Bull Shoals Lake.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to ask you about Beaver Creek is I think Neil Lopino and his team have been down there, I think this past summer, looking for Native American artifacts.
You know, when I was a kid,
did you ever find
they were just so numerous. We didn't. I found a beautiful tomahawk one time as a kid, and I was showing it to a friend of mine who went to the School of the Ozarks. At that time, they've done a 360 there. At that time, there was not a college of the Ozarks, not even a junior college, but it was a high school. And James Tabor, so I'll take it over and give it to the museum. So I gave it to him, forgot about it, and I don't know why. He probably forgot to take it over there because I've been to the museum. I looked for it, I never did see it. Yeah. But yes, there were artifacts everywhere, and it must have been a major Native American area because we would just see. We would actually throw them away. We'd get so many arrowheads and things.
Yeah, here's another one.
Yeah, common. Yeah.
Anything else from your childhood in Bradleyville that you particularly remember vividly, either good or bad?
Oh well, it was a good life for me. I enjoyed it a lot, and I grew up in a house where we had no electricity. Yeah. We had heating stoves. A cook stove in the kitchen had burned wood, and a heating stove in the living room. As I said before, one year I went to Union Flat School. My dad ran a store at Union Flat. It was just a little country store out in the middle of the country. Had one teacher with 8 grades, and but that was a hoot. We loved that. We would build a big cedar. The boys would build cedar houses out of the school, and we'd get to school early and run to the cedar houses and play in them. And I remember one time that we had a big cedar house with an adjacent room to it. We'd built it with boughs over it and covered it in, and we built a fire in there. I can't imagine kids doing this nowadays. And one of the boys had a handful of 22 shells. He said, "I wonder what would happen if I throw these in the fire." And everybody said, "Well, don't be stupid." Wham! He throws them in the fire. So we all went through the hole of the other room, and we just piled on top of each other, everybody trying to get to the bottom. And the shells started going off, and the going through the roof and whizzing by. Nobody got hurt.
Nobody took a bullet. Huh?
Yeah, we had all kinds of fun there. Then my dad and mom bought a store at Brown Branch. I went to school there, and as I said before, we loved swimming in the creek and squirrel hunting. I never did do much deer hunting, and in fact, in those days there were not very many deer. Yeah. Not many turkey. There were no turkeys at all.
Deer and turkey have really made a comeback in this region.
They have.
But it's been relatively recently. Just the last 25, 30 years.
They were very, almost never saw a turkey when I was there.
Yeah.
And in school, we had little school. I was one of 8 seniors who graduated from Bradleyville High School, and we really didn't have a very good school. I think at that time it was not even accredited. It was a non-approved school, but it was the school. And I had one really great teacher. Mrs. Brewer was the English teacher. Her husband was the superintendent, and he had been in World War II. C.D. Brewer, and his wife Dorothy Brewer. And she was an English teacher, and I really liked her. She was a pretty lady they were both from southern Mississippi, had a deep southern drawl. And nobody from Bradleyville, to my knowledge, up to that time, had ever gone to college. I graduated in 1953, and the first year Bradleyville had a high school was 1942, a 4-year high school. Before that, they had a Job High School. A Job High School was all over this area. That was a 2-year, 10th grade high school, and it was named after a Missouri State Senator named Jobe, J-O-B-E.
J-O-B-E.
J-O-B-E. And so I remember distinctly one day the bell rang. We were all in Mrs. Brewer's class. I think it was the end of the day. And we were all heading out the door, and she grabbed me by the arm. She said, "Come back." And I said, "What do you want?" She said, "You're going to go to college." I said, "No, I'm not. I want to get a job and get me a new car." No. She said, I want to talk to you. She said, "I want you to come and see me and Mr. Brewer tomorrow." So she reminded me that at that time, SMS gave a scholarship to the valedictorian class. Well, I wasn't a valedictorian. Patsy Gott was a valedictorian. I was a salutatorian. But she didn't go to college. She didn't want to go. So it came down to me. So she said, it won't cost you anything to go. So anyhow, I came to SMS in 1953, and I'm pledged to Sigma Pi. They're probably not even here now, are they? Sigma Pi fraternity?
I don't know. I do know. My brother was at Sigma Pi. So,
yeah. And I was here 1 year, and I didn't do very well because I spent more time drinking and partying. And
so what did you make of that? Coming to the big city and going to college?
It was a total shock. I mean, I had, before that I had hitchhiked out west, working in the migrant workers, working wheat harvest and so forth. But coming up here, I remember, for example, I went out to a restaurant with some of my fraternity brothers, and we ordered some coffee, and had a saucer, and I was pouring the coffee in my saucer, and I started drinking out of my saucer, and the guy said, "What the hell are you doing?" So I had my coffee. He said, "Don't do that." And I didn't know. I mean, that's the way we did at home. They did saucer and boil the coffee. I mean, that's the way I grew up. And I didn't know what that was. I remember taking a test. Maybe it was an IQ test. And they talked about if a 5-alarm fire happened here or something, I didn't have any idea what the hell a 5-alarm fire was. I'd never heard of fire. I'd never seen a fire truck, probably. And I didn't.
What does that mean? You ring the bell 5 times?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was a total culture shock. But I loved it. Really, I did love it, and I enjoyed it, and I did pretty well.
So you settled down, and
I got a standing ovation for getting a D in algebra because we never had any math at Bradleyville School. We had maybe fifth grade math. Our math teacher was a coach who didn't know anything about math, so we would have, long division. And I mean, it was just ridiculous. And he had to have college algebra, college English. So.
It's still a real hurdle for a lot of students to get past.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember the professor said at the end of the year, he said, "Mr. Combs, I want you to stand." He said, "I want everybody to know that Mr. Combs did pass. He got a D." So later on, I went to the Marine Corps, joined the Marine Corps, and after the Marine Corps, I went to Mizzou and graduated from journalism school. But
so a couple things. When you back in Bradleyville days, so you had no indoor plumbing?
No indoor plumbing, no indoor. It was all outhouses, and.
So when did electricity come to that region?
I think about 1946 or 47.
Do you remember that? Was it a big deal?
Yes, I remember the first time we had a light bulb.
Yeah.
And my dad would be sure to turn that light bulb off. You wouldn't have one on in the other room. Turn that off if you leave that room.
My dad was the same way.
Oh yeah,
What do you think? I own the electric company.
Just one little light bulb hanging down, and then later on, my mother got a electric washing machine, and it had a ringer on it. Now we still had to hang the clothes on the line.
Yeah.
I'd have to help her go hang the clothes. You'd have a clothesline outside. You'd take the clothes out, and she made me iron my Levi's. So she said, "If you're going to wear those things, And I'm not ironing the damn thing, so you got to iron yourself. So I'd have to. I just knew that I'd have to iron those jeans.
So in the 50s and 60s, wearing Levi's was kind of a rebellious statement?
A little bit, but in those days, you'd buy them long, you'd roll them up a little bit, so you can see your white socks, you know. And on wash day, I remember too that I had to draw the water out of the well. I hated wash days, but I have to draw the water two gallons at a time, take a rope with a pulley and let the thing, draw it back up, dump it out, and then build a big fire over here and put a kettle, black kettle on it. Carry the water, 2 gallons, dump it in there, fill that up full of water, get the fire going, get it boiling hot. Then you carry it 2 buckets at a time and put it in the wash machine. And my mother used that to wash her clothes. Then you'd have to draw another 2 big tubs full of cold water, and for her rinsing tub, she'd have bluing in one of them and not bluing in the other one. I didn't even know what that was. But I knew I had to fill them up. And she was always being in a rotten mood, you know, because she was having to work her tail off too. So I had no plumbing and no electricity, and we were not encouraged to ever read a book. You know, I mean, and when it got darker, I went to bed, whether it was 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, we went to bed. And when it was 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, you got up. You know, and I remember reading maybe 1 or 2 books. We did not have a library at Bradleyville School. We had no library at all.
A few textbooks and that was about it.
We had a few textbooks, and I think they were just owned by the school, and we just used them when we got in the 5th grade. Whatever textbooks they had, we shared them often, and I don't even know where they came from.
Now, when did sort of radio come to the region?
We had radio since I can remember. They were big console things, and big this tall, very decorative, you know. And really, the actual radio was smaller inside, but they had big, beautiful consoles.
Like, you know,
and we would listen to, my dad would listen to the St. Louis Cardinals. He could get KMOX out of St. Louis. And everybody listened to the Grand Ole Opry. I mean, that was the main thing on Saturday night. In fact, I can remember people coming to our house, and we'd have popcorn. There was no drinking. We were Southern Baptist, no drinking, no dancing, no card playing, no movies. But on Saturday night, everybody would come and would listen to the Grand Ole Opry. And I grew up not being allowed to play cards. Even today, I don't play cards much, because I just didn't learn how to shuffle the cards much. I never had a drink of anything until I guess I was about 17. And then when I did start drinking, I went way overboard, and by the time I was 30, I was a confirmed alcoholic. I joined AA in 1966. In fact, this summer, July 22nd, was my 50th anniversary in AA. Never had another drink after that. But I was headed down the route that my father had gone, and on both sides of my family, there was rampant alcoholism. That's kind of off the subject here. But anyhow, back in Bradleyville, the entertainment was that sort of thing. Church, everybody went to church, and in the summertime, my mother I had a blue wool suit that I inherited from somebody else, one of a cousin or something, and I'd have to wear that wool suit with scratchy. I mean, it was real scratchy, you know, kind of old kind. And a hot night, I had to sit in the front row, and sometimes these guys would preach all day long. I mean, they had all day meeting in the summer on the ground, and all day meeting and dinner on the ground. And they had started in the morning with Sunday school, and one preacher would follow another one. They would break in time for dinner, it was called, and everybody would bring fried chicken and potato salad, and they'd lay out the tablecloths on it. And everybody would have a big joyful dinner, and they'd go back in the church house. Here we go again. And I just remember couldn't wait to get home and get my overalls on, get rid of the beautiful overalls.
Did you ever have pie suppers? You ever attend a pie supper?
Yes. I went to real old-fashioned pie suppers. I've been to several of them.
Tell me about that.
They would. Well, first of all, it was kind of a romantic thing. All the girls would bring pies, and they would be unidentified, and they would somehow bring them so you wouldn't see them. Maybe be in boxes or something, big beautiful boxes with ribbons on them, you know, and everybody would want to buy certain pies, because when you bought a pie, all the money, the proceeds went to some cause, a church or something.
Right.
If you bought a pie, you'd get to eat it with Juanita or whoever the beautiful girl was.
Yeah.
And everybody would try to guess which is Juanita's pie.
Right.
And or some other nice looking girl, and then you'd get in a bidding contest. I've seen pies sell for $40 or $50. In those days, that'd be like $400 or $500 today.
Yeah.
But I mean, you get guys that'd spend their month's salary on it, and then you'd after
To
the
get
pie
to pie
was
with
over.
Juanita.
Yeah, then it would be identified when all the bidding was over. Nobody knew until it was all over. It's okay now. Leon Combs, let's see who he got. He got Maybell. You know, I'm making these names up.
I know, we're protecting the innocent. But you got the homeliest girl.
Oh yeah, it was a big fat homely girl, whatever. And it was this sort of thing was great entertainment. You know, now we have everything. We have concerts, we have movies and television and anything you can imagine, but these simple ways of enjoying each other and the interacting that we did. As I came here today, I probably saw 50 students, and I'll bet 48 of them either had as they walked, they had the phone in their hand, or they had it in their hand down here.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the way, I'm the same way.
I do the same thing. When I walk out, I'll count to 10. First 10 users I see, are they actively looking at some screen? And usually it's never less than 7. And usually it's 8, 9, 10 are looking at a screen.
Yeah, and it's just the way of the world. But, you know, and I think maybe back in my day, you didn't have, in fact, we didn't have any telephones. Mm-hmm. I had never spoken on telephone until I came up here in Springfield.
Really?
And no telephones, but I heard stories of when my father was a boy back in early 1900s. They did have some phones in the air. They were party line phones. So we never had phones, but just the entertainment there were things like that, and they had rodeos and truck pullings and tractor pullings, and I mean, and baseball games and all kinds of entertainment. But most of it involved physical activity. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was common for my mother to be screaming at me after dark to come in the house, you know, because we were outside playing. Right. Nobody wanted to go in because inside, you know, nothing to do. Right. So but now my grandkids, I have to drive them outside. They're all sitting with their computers in their face.
So it's been a 180. How did you get to and from Bradleyville to SMS?
I think we had in those days. I'd catch a ride with somebody else, and I rode with some people from Ava who would come through Bradleyville, and I catch a ride a couple of times. I almost hate to mention this, but my dad bought a new 1950 Ford, and he paid $1,854 for it, brand new royal blue. Yeah. And so I talked to him and let me bring it up here. By this time it's 53, so it was 2 or 3 years old. Yeah. I brought it up here one weekend and wrecked it. You know, the first week I got completely smashed in, and then that was that. And then a few months later, I got him to let me bring it up again, and so I was sitting up here, close to here, and I had some guys in the car with me showing off, and I was at a stop sign. I said, "Watch me peel rubber." So I was sitting at the stop sign, and I had it in low gear. These were manual shift, low gear. So I just revved it up as high as the RPMs would go. Then I popped the clutch. I thought, well, it just shuddered and jumped up and down and dropped the transmission on the floor. So just completely busted the housing transmission, which is a stupid thing to do. And that sort of thing. So that I got back and forth that way. That was about the only 2 times I brought it. And then later on, when I was in the Marine Corps, I came home on leave, and they let me borrow the car again. They got it fixed up this time. And I went out drinking and completely total wrecked it. Just rolled it down the road upside down.
So you single-handedly are the reason why teenager insurance rates are so high.
I probably so, and you think, now here I'm an adopted child. They had 3 more kids beside me, and when I came home that night drunk, now this time I was 19 years old. I came home at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I woke Dad and Mom up. I said, "Dad, I wrecked your car." He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, go on to bed." I said, "No, we gotta go get it. It's in the middle of the road. It's upside down in the middle of the road." So he got up, and we got our truck. He owned a store. Went and got the car, turned it up, dragged it down to the Lewis Albright's garage, and never said a cross word to me. Really? They didn't have insurance for it.
Really?
and I would have killed me if it, I mean, I cried like a baby. I was drunk and ashamed and so forth. Then later on, Dad told me that after I went to bed, my mom came in and uncovered me because they couldn't believe. He said, "You should see that car. It's just crumpled up into one little mess. I didn't have a scratch on me, but they didn't believe me. So she had uncovered me when I was asleep
just to make
to
sure.
check me out." Yeah. Well, anyhow, I'm kind of getting off the subject.
Great parents, yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned briefly that you'd go out, I guess in your early high school years, you'd go out and do like the wheat harvest and things?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What was that?
Between three times, I left Bradleyville in the spring of 1952. I had just finished my junior year with Russell Selvage and Bill Blair, and we caught a bus from Springfield. I wrote about this in one of my little books. We caught a bus from Springfield to Kansas City, and we were in the Greyhound bus station, which was a huge, I mean, I'd never seen it like this. I mean, escalator, I saw an escalator, couldn't believe it. And just great big place, like a big airport nowadays, because most people didn't fly in 1952. I mean, people, my people didn't. So we had a Greyhound ticket to Yakima, Washington, and we finally got on the bus. That's where I saw my first television too. There was in a bar that we could see a black and white TV, and some old guy said, "You know, there's a boxing match going." He said, them guys is really fighting, and they're in New York City, and you can see it happen right now." And so people were gained around looking in the window at it. We got on the bus, went towards Salina, Kansas. I think we got Salina somewhere. The Greyhound bus drivers went on strike, and so all of a sudden we had a problem. And so the Greyhound people, they shuffled us around and took us across town to a trailway station. Back in those days, Greyhound and Trailways were the two big bus lines. Well, Trailways, that took us to Denver, and then Denver went to somewhere else, and put us on a train. Train went up through Montana, and we had a heck of a time. We ran into a hooker, played cards with a hooker. Went out there, I mean, and had a great time.
So how did they harvest wheat back then? Was it wheat or was it fruit?
In the Horseshoe Mountains of Washington. I worked both in a pea harvest and a wheat harvest, and both I drove a truck mostly. They had big caterpillars, big bulldozer type things that would pull these combines over these mountains like this, and they had levelers. They'd be going along the right wheel. They had big hydraulic jacks on. They would lower it maybe 6 feet. More than the left wheel to level off. You're going around this mountain, and the big guy, they had a bulldozer would pull it, and then when I'd pull the truck up, they'd have to hook my truck on with log chains to the truck to keep from turning over. Then they would auger the wheat into the truck, and then as soon as I turned this, I had to turn right and go down the hill and go.
And then you deliver it to the
back to the elevator.
Until the elevator.
And and the foreman's daughter had a beautiful 15-year-old daughter, and she sat out in front of the house in her bathing suit. And I go, and there's a long story to that.
She knew what she was doing.
And I wrote about that in my book too. She and I became an item, and that was an exciting part of my life. But I did that, and we lived in a bunkhouse with other guys. This was seasonal work. We got $15 a day, no withholding, 7 days a week. So in 1952, I was making $105 a week, and that was good money for.
You had a beautiful girlfriend.
Oh, beautiful girl! I mean, I had all the benefits. That was probably the greatest part of my life. So then I came back, and I finished my senior year in high school. Went out the next year and did the same thing. I think I hitchhiked the next year, and worked in the same area. Came back here to SMS in '53, and then I went back out after this year here, and I was going to come back, so I worked all summer long. I had saved $600. I was in Walla Walla, Washington. I was getting a bus ticket to come home, but the bus was not going to go until later that night or the next morning. So I went into a little bar over there. I was 18 at the time, and I went in to see if I could order beer, and they served me. And I was sitting there, and an old boy said, we were talking. He said, "You like to play poker?" I said, "Oh yeah, we play poker in a bunkhouse all the time." He said, "We got a little game back here if you want to join us." Back in behind. So I said, "Yeah, I join you." So I went back there, and they had a fifth of Jack Daniels on the table. So old guys sitting around a circle with little visors on, and then a lamp down in the middle of the table. And they said, "Son, just help yourself to the whiskey." So I reached down in my shoe where I had my money hidden and pulled it out. And I left there about 2 or 3 hours later, blind drunk and broke. Took all my money.
Really?
And so I started hitchhiking from there, and
Yeah.
that's when I ended up joining the Marine Corps.
So you joined the Marines. Where did you serve?
My Marine Corps tour was very mild. It was 1954. I was in for 3 years and never did go overseas. There was no war going on at the time. We were all hoping a war would break out. You know, we were young and stupid.
Right.
But I had a back injury. They were going to send me to Japan, but I had a back injury, ended up in the hospital, and had a back operation. So I got mustered out a little bit early in 1957. I got out September 10th in order to go to Mizzou. I had pre-enrolled in Mizzou Journalism School, or to go to journalism school, and I was out September 10th, 1957.
Okay. So at this stage in your life, so you'd had some life experiences, as we said.
Yeah.
I mean, what'd you make your Bradleyville and your home life then? Were you yearning for it? Were you embarrassed by it?
No. I was well, maybe embarrassed by it, because I think unlike today, it seems that today the kids all, they don't want to leave. They all want to stay home until they're 30 years old. When I was 17, I couldn't wait to get out of there.
Yeah. You
But
had no
one reason,
intention
when we would have cousins come and visit us at Bradleyville, they'd say, well, you know, they were talking about Babe Ruth, and I didn't know. We didn't take newspapers. I remember my family came from California, and we went to see the St. Louis Browns play the Yankees, because they were big baseball fans. In 1950, that's when it was, 1950, the St. Louis Cardinals were the farthest team west. There was no team farther west.
Right.
And they were big Cardinal fans. Almost everybody was Cardinal fans west, because they had
West
the
of the
Cardinal
Mississippi.
Oh yeah, everybody loved the Cardinals. So they came back. It was my sister, who was 20 years older than I, and her husband, her 2 boys, came back, and we went to St. Louis to see the Browns play the Yankees. And I think, in 1950, I think, well, I can't remember who I was playing. We saw some big stars, but I didn't know who they were.
Yeah.
I was more taken with just the city. You know, I remember driving at Chateau, I think Chateau Boulevard, and as we went in, I saw all these houses that looked exactly alike. And I thought, well, how does someone know? Especially if they come home drunk, I wouldn't have no house to go into.
Which one's mine?
But I was at the ballpark. I was more taken. Well, I remember going to the restroom, and there was a urinal there that was 100 yards long, and I was intimidated. I wasn't ready to walk up to it. But those things were, to me, more remarkable than the ball game itself.
Yeah. So you did go to Mizzou then?
Did go to Mizzou. I got there in September '57, and in November, a girl had become engaged to who was a hostess in a Hollywood USO. The Marines always go to the Hollywood USO, free coffee and donuts and ping pong with the girls. And one of the girls, who was one of the hostesses there, I became engaged to her, and she came back to Missouri, and she wanted to get married. And I said, I can't get married. I don't have any money. I don't have anything. Well, she had a 1955 Ford, and she started crying. And she said, well, I told my mother to go get married. So I said, okay, this happened this way. I said, let's get her marriage license. I'm going to take you down to Bradleyville. So this girl was a Jewish girl from Brooklyn. She had grown up in Brooklyn. When she was 16 years old, her parents moved to Los Angeles. And so you can imagine taking a Jewish girl from Brooklyn to Bradleyville. You're talking about a culture shock. But she handled it pretty well. I mean, It was and I write about it in my book, about how the evening we got there, it was 1957. It was Thanksgiving Eve, because we spent the night there, and the next day was Thanksgiving. And when we were there, I had 2 brothers who were much young teenagers, and there was a mouse in the house. And Dad said, Joe, there it goes. So they got down on their hands and knees, and they cornered the mouse. It was and my wife had had her legs up on the tail, and my mother put her arms around her, and she was looking out of the corner of her eye and was terrified. And they caught the mouse and killed it with a bare hand. So that was her introduction to the Ozarks. So the next day we got up and washed our hands and had Thanksgiving dinner, and she and I had our marriage license. We came up here and we went to a Baptist church. I think it was over on Glenstone, because at that time there was no Highway 65, or there was no new one.
Right.
So somewhere on Glenstone.
Glenstone was Highway 65.
There was a Baptist church, and we went roused the pastor from back behind the church in his house and asked him if he could marry us. And he said, I got your license? Yeah. So he got his wife to come out, and we got married there on the backstage with his wife's witness. And that was November 28, 1957. And my wife and I lived together for many years until she passed away in March of 1981. We had 2 children. We had 3 children. One, we lost a little girl who was 8 weeks old with a congenital heart attack. But my daughter lives in Boston now. My son lives in St. Louis.
Yeah. So the marriage worked out, even though it was.
Oh, she was she was a lovely lady, and she was a good mother and a good wife, and she adjusted very well. I tried to keep in mind her background, and we did go to Brooklyn and visit her family, and so it worked out real well. She was a lovely lady, and I hate to see it go.
Yeah. So where did you live during most of your married life?
We lived in Columbia for until I finished the university, which I just got a bachelor's degree in journalism, and that was 1960. I went to work for Jostens in January of 1960, selling yearbooks in Northeast Missouri. So we lived in Columbia. I traveled to Kirksville and Hannibal and St. Louis County and sold yearbooks for Jostens. And then in 1965, we moved to St. Louis because I was becoming one of the top salesmen in the company. And so we moved to St. Louis in 1965. And then in 1965 is when 1966 is when I recognized I had a major problem with alcohol. And that's when I went to my first AA meeting. And my whole life turned around for the better at that time, because I was having some serious problems with my marriage because of me, and with my job because of me. And then things started changing, and by 1970, those 5 years, I went from last in a company of Jostens, out of 1,000 salesmen nationally. Wow. I became #1 in 1970, and I remained #1 every year until I retired from Jostens in 1985. So for 15 years. 15 consecutive years. No, it was, 15 from 70 to 85. And that was delivered dollar volume, who sold the most yearbooks in the nation. And because I had a knack for that. And I think, back to your original question, I think the training I had in Bradleyville, the fact that I had many jobs to do, and I learned to do them well and do them right, or if I didn't, I got punished. And for example, my job to cut the wood in a kindling, to have the kindling box full and the wood box full. So when my dad got up to build a fire at 4 o'clock in the morning in the wintertime, he had the stuff there. If he got up and the box wasn't full, he'd come in and shake me out of bed and go out and cut some wood. I'm going back to bed. So he'd go back to bed. I have to go out in the snow or whatever and cut the wood and come and build a fire. Hey, that only happened about once.
Yes, you have incentive to do it right the first time.
I think the training there and the relationship building, it was natural, helped me a lot in my Jostens work and working with school administrators, superintendents, and principal, getting them to buy the yearbook publishing from me, and then servicing over the years, helping the kids and the teachers do the book and so forth. And so I got a good reputation.
Yeah. And you were the #1 salesperson.
#1 salesman. And then in 1981, I was selling a yearbook to a little secretarial school in St. Louis called Sanford-Brown College.
Yeah.
And sold it, and I had about 75 kids in secretarial school. And the old lady who owned the school, she said to me, she said, Mr. Combs, why don't you buy this place from me? She said, my husband, I said, what do you mean buy it? How can you buy a college? She said, well, this is a proprietary college. Yeah. I own it. My husband died. And so we talked about it, and so for $285,000, I bought the college and a 20-unit dormitory, which I took over the equity in it, and $50,000 down with a 5-year payout. Well, it became, she never got it accredited because she didn't want to get it accredited because she didn't want to take minority students. She was an old Southern bigoted woman. She said, if I get it accredited and give government students and Pell Grants and loans, I'll have to take, she said, this way I can decide who I want to take because everybody got to pay cash. I got the school accredited right away. I hired some PhDs I had known from secondary schools. We got it accredited. We started. This was 1981. Reagan had just taken office. We had a terrible recession. Interest rates were 15 to 20%. Everybody was unemployed. Everybody wanted to go to school. I started advertising on television. People came pouring in. I started a second school in South St. Louis, a third one in Illinois, a fourth one in St. Charles County, a fifth one in Kansas City. Then I started a truck driving school in Missouri, Illinois, and Ohio, and people were just pouring to schools, and we were getting jobs. Everybody got a job. We were training them in computers and accounting and secretarial and truck driving, and so that's where.
So you continue with Jostens until 85, so there's kind of that 5-year transition period. That
85, I cut a deal with Jostens. No one had ever done this, but and meanwhile, before 85, from 81 or so to 85, I owned the school and worked for Jostens.
Yeah.
and the joke was, Combs only works part-time, he's still number one. And but I was making about $250,000 a year in 1980, and that was a lot of money in those days.
Yeah.
And Bill Lerton, President Jostens, came to St. Louis to see the school I'd bought. And I took him to Sanford-Brown, and I showed him how much money I was making there. And I said, you guys should consider this. And so Jostens bought a whole string of proprietary schools across the nation. And they were making,
Not from you.
not from me, just from other police, because of me.
Yeah.
And they were making lots of money at that time. So when I was ready to retire, I went to Minneapolis to the headquarters and talked to Chairman of the Board, Bill Lerton. And I said, I want to sell you my territory, because we were self-employed. And but they usually just had some kind of a program where you would turn it over to somebody else. And I said, I want $1 million for my territory, because I was making more than that at that time.
Yeah.
And he said, we don't do that. He said, we don't do that. I said, well, you're going to, or I'm going to get somebody else. And he said, well, Bob Pope handles that. And I said, well, Bill, I said, you're making about $40 million a year now off your school that I put you into. I give you the idea. I said, all I'm looking for is $1 million. I went the next morning to talk to Bob Pope, and he said, we're going to do your deal. He said, we're going to give you $600,000 now and $400,000 next year. I said, good, it's a done deal. So they sent a guy in, I trained him, and I left Jostens, and I stayed in St. Louis and ran my schools.
So you never looked back to Jostens?
Never looked back. It was the best thing.
You were satisfied?
Satisfied. They were happy with me. They still, I've been going back to even, they did ask me to stay on for 4 or 5 years as a consultant. They would call me, and I would fly to West Coast or East Coast or somewhere and meet a group of salesmen and talk to them. And that was part of my agreement to get $1 million.
Yeah.
But I had a wonderful career with them, and even today they ask me to come back and make speeches to the young guys.
Yeah.
And they've got my pictures on the wall, because I was the first guy. Now they've got guys who far exceeded what I did, but they didn't in those days.
Yeah. So how long did you stick with the private colleges? And
I sold
truck driving
everything
schools?
in 1994.
94.
And that's when I moved back to Bradleyville.
Okay, that's what was going to be the next question. When did you come back to Bradleyville?
Yeah, in 1994, we moved back to Bradleyville, and I bought several farms, about 10 farms, all contiguous. I ended up with 3,500 acres, and then I bought Rocky Mountain elk, and I fenced up part of the ranch for the elk. And we have cattle and elk, and we have Beaver Creek running through our place for about 3 miles, beautiful Beaver Creek, and beautiful 3,000 acres of hills and grass and trees. And it's just a beautiful place. We built us a nice new home up on the hill. Yeah. And it's been a good life.
So when you were, when you were making the decision to come back to Bradleyville, what were your thoughts? I just want to go home.
Well, that is a good question, because I had decided one time I would never go back to Bradleyville, because we were so behind with everything there. I just didn't want to go back. But then when I
behind,
married,
you mean technologically?
Well, technologically in every way, educationally,
socially.
Technologically. I just when I was young, I was kind of embarrassed when I would come up here or go to the city somewhere and show my ignorance, where I came from. I thought, God, why didn't I learn this? Well, there was no way to learn it. Right. So I thought I may never go back. Well, my wife passed away, and I was single for like 8 years. Then I met and married Dorothy Hayes, my current wife. And she came down here with me a time or two. She said, she loved the place. She said, well, why don't we move back down here? Because I'm getting ready to retire.
Where was she from?
She was from Alton, Illinois.
Alton.
She was across the river from St. Louis. Yeah. And she lived near me and our family in St. Louis when my wife passed away. And her husband she'd been divorced for 15 years. But anyhow, she was probably the reason I came back, and she kind of opened my eyes. She said, "This is gorgeous. This is a beautiful place. I'd love to live here." And so we started looking at it, and that's when we started buying land, and we moved into an old farmhouse that's 100 years old. We lived in for several years. Then we found this beautiful spot on top of it. In fact, I was still in St. Louis. My brother called me. He said, "There's 40 more acres you need to buy." And I said, "I don't want more land. He said, "Well, this is a beautiful piece of land." And I said, "Well, how much is it?" He said, "It's $18,000. I said, "Well, I'll send you a check." We did paperwork by mail. Yeah. I came down later on, 3 or 4 months later, and he said, "Have you seen your ground you bought?" I said, "No, where is it?" So he said, "Come on." So we got an old Jeep, went up there, had to cut the fence, and it was trees and brush and rocks. We went up on this hill. You got a gorgeous view. At nighttime, we're 50 miles away, we can see the aura of Springfield lights. We see Branson lights. It's a beautiful view. And I said, this would be a great place to build a house. And so a few years later, that's where we built our house.
So the last 40 acres were the home site.
The last 40 acres were the home site, and I paid $18,000 for 40 acres, and it's I spent a little bit more than that on it later on. But it has been a great life.
So that was like 22 years ago. So you've been back in the region for 22 years.
Been retired for 22 years. Yeah. That's why I'm almost broke now. I spent all my retirement money. Yeah. Yes.
I heard that when you were acquiring all this land, part of you had one resident on the land by the name of Birdle Mannon. And describe for the listening audience.
Birdle Mannon was a lady I knew. I've known all my life, and she was my Sunday school teacher when I was a little boy. Really? And Birdle lived back in the hills, and she, even when other people had all the modern things, she never had electricity. She never had running water. And Birdle was an intelligent person. She and her family had come from North Platte, Nebraska in a covered wagon pulled by oxen in 1916. And they came through here, and they went to Chadwick, and they came under Bradley. Her father bought 200 acres of woodland in the Ozarks. And she and her sister and brother were there, and her mother, and the whole family. Well, anyhow, they all died one at a time except Myrtle, and she lived alone for many years. And so I went over, I would interview her and talk with her. I've got some tape recordings of her, which I think I gave to you guys. And she did not want electricity. She's not on electricity. I don't need electricity. She had coal oil lamps. She had an old wood stove with big holes in it, and her place was just a shambles with paper and blankets all around. But the stove, I don't know why she didn't burn the house down, but she had a well for water. She had a cellar outside where she kept all of her canned fruit. She had an outhouse. And one time in an interview, I said, "Birdle, what do you have for breakfast?" She said, "Oh, I have fruit and sausage." And so you don't have a refrigerator. How do you have sausage? She said, I got canned. She canned sausage. And she had canned peaches and things. And so she'd uncan sausage and warm it. She had an old heating stove, an old-time fashioned heating stove that she'd burn wood in. And 10 feet away was the cook stove and a heating stove. So she'd heat it up and heat up the sausage and fry it again or warm it up. And I said, "Well, what do you do all day?" She said, "What time do you get up?" She said, "Oh, whenever I feel like it." And she reads the Bible. She's an authority on the Bible. She knew the Bible inside and out. And when I was a kid, she wrote we had the Taney County Times or Taney County Republican newspaper, a county paper, and each little village sent their story in. And we lived in Brown Branch at the time, which is 5 miles from Bradleyville. So she sent in the Brown Branch story. She wrote the Brown Branch story. And she was recognized by the Missouri Press Association as the correspondent of the year in the state of Missouri. Really? So she wrote beautifully. She read. She was educated. She was educated. And we didn't know how until later on when I think Dr. Nitsky, who is it? Nitzel came down with Richard. And they came down after I bought the place. She died, and I bought the place. And they climbed up in the attic, and they found these old suitcases full of paintings and things. And among all the things in the attic of that old cabin had been there for 50, 60 years were workbooks from SMS where Birdle had come up here during the summers
really?
and had taken classes at SMS.
I didn't know
I think
that.
she had the equivalent of about 2 years of college.
Yeah.
And she used to teach school down there. She would walk long distance. She taught school at Possum Trot.
Uh-huh.
A school called Possum Trot. She walked to Possum Trot.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So she was an educated, but she was just a self-sufficient Ozarks woman.
Yep. Yep. She took care of herself, and she loved people. She loved kids. And I asked her one time, I said, Berta, why did you never get married? She said, I would love to have been married. I just never did meet the right person. But I remember taking my niece over there when she had a little baby, and Berta would hold the baby. She had no rocking chair. She'd hold it and rock it.
Yeah.
And you may not have read the story about it. I got a call one day when she was still living, and from a reporter for the USA Today. And Bill Varner called me, and he said, I had heard from a mutual friend that there's no woman lives down there that I'd like to interview. I said, who are you talking? He said, Birdle Mannon. I said, yeah, I know Birdle. He said, I'd like to come down and interview her. So I said, well, he said, would you see if she would interview me? I said, yeah, I'll go talk to her. So I did. I called him. I said, yeah, she said she'd see you. So he said he'd come down. Long story short, but he said, I said, we've got a guest house that you can stay in. He said, no, I'll get a motel. I said, well, you won't get a motel in Bradleyville because we're on it. So anyhow, he finally agreed. He stayed in our guest house, and he came down. It was late. It was a dark November day, overcast, and my wife and I lived in an old farmhouse at that time. So he'd agreed to have dinner with us that night, and we had told Birdle we would be over to see her later on. And he wanted to go see her, and it was, I told Di, I said, delay dinner as much as you can. I want to go after dark. So after dinner, we got in an old 74 Chevy azure blue truck I had with a hood tied down with baling wire. We got in that, and so we started driving over, and we got down the little gravel road, and hardly anybody ever went back to see Birdle. It was about 2 or 3 miles back in the wood. And you'd go along, it was nighttime. This guy, Bill Varner, he was hyperventilating as we started down this road. He said, are there any wild animals here? I said, well, yeah, sometimes there are mountain lions, but not too often. So we were going down the road there, and there was a tree limb falling across the road. And so I said, well, you got to help me get this out. It had been a storm. So we got out, and as we were going out, there was a rustling of leaves. And he started screaming. It was our old dog had followed us. Just run to catch up. He was some wild animal. We drove one down. We got close to the cabin, and it was nighttime. And it looked like an Alfred Hitchcock movie. You could see up there, and you could see the silhouette of the old woman with a head tied over her head in the window. She had her lamp on, obviously. And so, we got up to the house and parked, and he was just almost holding on to me because he was a city boy. He'd never been out of the city.
Did Birdle have a shotgun? Did she have a gun?
She did have a gun. She also had shears. She had no boards in her house would flop up and down, and sometimes a snake would stick its head up, and she'd snap its head off with shears. So we got to the door, and it's dark, and so Birdle was almost deaf. So I just started banging on the door. She knew it was coming. He said, oh my God. He said, don't hit it so hard. Well, I said, you got to hit it hard to get her attention. So I bang, bang, bang. Finally, she came to the door. He went in, and I did most of the interviewing at first because he was just shell shocked because there was no dog under the bed there. And she was very friendly and nice, and so I kind of led the interview, and he was taking notes. And in fact, he had a tape recorder. But anyhow. We went back that night, and I let him borrow that old pickup. Well, I had another car. I said, Bill, you can have this. No, he had rented a car in Springfield, so he had a rental car. But I said, when he wanted to go see Birdle. He's going to stay here 3 or 4 days. He said, I want to go see her because I want to stay 3 or 4 days. I said, well, then you can have this truck because you can't get your car back there. So he did. He stayed. He interviewed her. He got her and hauled her around, and she showed him sights and told him stories. And he had a ball, and when he left, I said, did you get your thing? He called up here, I think probably called the news leader to get a Gannett photographer, and they sent a photographer down. And he told us, he said, this is going to be a front page story. And I said, and Doc said, how can it be a front? It's not news. He said, you mark my word. And then I said, are you going to write the story when you get back? He said, I've already written the story and sent it in. I said, this is 1990. 6.
Mm-hmm.
I said, how did you send it in? Well, what he had done, he had emailed it from using the phone, the AOL dial-up
Yeah.
modem somehow. He had emailed it back to Washington the night before, which shocked me.
In 96.
Yeah. But anyhow, then I think it was the day after Christmas. We were in San Francisco, and he called us and he said, "Where are you?" I said, he said, "Get a USA Today and check it out." So we went out and got a USA Today, and there's on the front page a big picture of Birdle, close up, with the whole story.
Really?
Did you ever see that?
No, I'll look it up though. So it was around Christmas time of '96.
In '96, I think it was December 26th of '96.
All right.
And I've got one paper at the house that if you can't find it, I can show it to you.
I'll find it.
But the story is just great, and he tells her she never heard of Elvis, she never heard of the Beatles,
Uh-huh.
and he told the whole story about and the U.S. He said they got more calls on that story than any story he'd ever done.
Really?
And we had a mutual friend in Chicago who said that he was listening to the radio that morning, and some disc jockey on the radio had got a hold of that paper, and he was reading that story about Birdle. And he said people were calling in and commenting, and then by that time she had a party line telephone.
Mm-hmm.
So they managed to call Big Jim's store in Bradleyville, and they gave out her phone number. And so her phone was ringing all day long, and she got packages in the mail, stacks of packages from kids in Pennsylvania, sending her sweaters, because in the story said something about she was wearing sweaters because it was cold.
So what was the tone of the story? Was it?
Very positive.
It wasn't like, look at this funny old woman who doesn't know about the 20th century.
He didn't make fun of her. It was very positive, and kind of a back to the what it's like in the olden days. I mean, he complimented her, because at some point in the story, as I recall, she said, "Well, I didn't know." He asked her about the Beatles and Elvis, and she said, "I assume they were singers, weren't they?" And she said, she would tell me this later on. I said, "Yeah, they were singers." She said, "Well, he didn't know several people in the Bible either." I didn't know the singers, but he didn't know about Barnabas.
Turnabout is fair play. So she passed.
Yeah.
And what happened to her house?
She passed away, and some other people who had befriended her before she died, we found out later, had bought the house for almost nothing, because they told her that when she died, because she had been on welfare for a long time, that the government would just take it. So they bought it for almost nothing. And then later on, I heard that the IRS came in and did take from them a sizable amount of money that they owed, that Birdle owed, and then I bought it from them.
Oh.
I don't want to name any names, but
Yeah.
I bought it from them. I paid full price for it, and it was like 240 acres now.
Yeah.
And then after President Nitzel came down and Dave Richards came down,
Right.
and Peter Hersham from Silver Dollar City, all came together, and they wanted the house. So the library here took all the memorabilia, and Peter Hersham had the house disbanded, and he took it back to Silver Dollar City and re-erected it there. It's there.
It's still down there.
It's still down there, and they have copies of many of the paintings and pictures and letters and so forth from here. They made copies and put them on the wall.
Yeah.
And they had a storyteller in the cabin who would, as people come through, they would tell the Birdle story. And she was dressed in period clothing.
Birdle story.
Yeah.
So did you ever hear the story when Dave Richards was down there? So I guess he was deputized to go up into the attic to sort of reconnoiter up there.
He did. He went up there. He went up there for sure. He found something I hadn't found. I hadn't even been up there to look for, but he found all those the wooden suitcases, I call it, and they had leather. The old man was quite an artist. I mean, and I remember him. He rode a donkey. He had a club foot. One foot he had heels on this long.
Yeah.
It's gonna rain.
Well, the other thing that Dave found up there in the attic was, so he was going through all those papers, and I'm sure he was pretty excited when he was seeing some of this stuff.
Oh yeah, he was very excited.
And then he happened to look over, and I'm sure it was pretty dark up there, not a lot of light, and over in the corner was a possum just sleeping.
I'd forgotten about that. It's his home.
That's right. And Dave said, well, you know, he's not too worked up about it. I just Dave went back to his work.
Yeah, I remember Dave, he was up there a long time. I didn't know what he was doing, but he was finding
he was
things.
communing with the possum, I guess.
Yeah. And the people who bought this before, I guess they thought they had stripped the place of everything of any value.
Yeah.
But they hadn't gone up there. I mean, that's where the real good things were.
Yeah. So at some point you became very interested in sort of the history of the region, especially the White River Valley. And you know, when did that passion sort of when did it come to the fore that you really thought that
I think when I came back, I knew that our area there was very involved in the Civil War, you know, because we were right on the borderline there. Because I have one great grandfather was on the north side, one great grandfather fought for the Confederacy, and I was always kind of interested in it. When I came back, I became a member of the White River Valley Historical Society, and I've been there. I'm still on that board, and I enjoy tremendously reading about the area, and I've done a lot, as much as I could, to help build the Historical Society up. They're doing a good job now. They've got one in Forsyth and one in Branson, and I'm just really proud of it, and I've always been amazed at how people managed to survive back when they were burning the courthouse. They're burning out so many of the records are non-existent now because the courthouse was burned during the war, and again in 1885 I think it was burned, and it's the people, most of them have grandfathers, great-grandfathers who fought in the Civil War around there. Yeah. So it's just, and you get stories, and I had my mother's stepfather, Joe Mosley, was a Civil War veteran. I think he was a Union soldier, and he got and this is my adopted mother I'm talking about. Her father had died of tuberculosis when he was fairly young, and her mother remarried Joe Mosley, who was much older. I remember him. He was almost 100 years old when he died. When I was a kid, he was always in a bed. I remember when he died, they put pennies on his eyes. That's what he used to do, and people would. They would just bury them. They wouldn't have a funeral. They would take care of it themselves. Yeah. But he was a veteran, and he would tell stories about the Civil War. And I asked my mother later on, long after he died, I said, "Why did Grandma marry this old guy?" She said, "Because of his money." I said, "He didn't have any money, did he?" She said, "Well, he had a Civil War pension. He got $7 a month." So I mean, and they had almost starved. I mean, there were times when during the Depression, they never even noticed the Depression in much part of the area because they'd been poor before, during, and after. Yeah. You know, and my dad was a moonshiner, and my grandfather went to jail. He was sheriff of Taney County, and then after he was sheriff, he got caught by the revenuers and sent to Leavenworth for 6 months for moonshining. But that's part of the history of my family.
Yeah. Well, horse seems the mind, so.
Well, there's been rustling in my ranch this past week.
Really?
We've got 10 cows missing right now. That I put a notice on Facebook this morning that.
I don't follow too closely. Are beef prices pretty high still, or?
Well, they're down from where they were, but still, I don't know where those. They weren't my cattle. Another man leases my property, and he's missing 10 cows and calf. And he doesn't know whether it was stolen or they just broke out and gone somewhere. So, I don't know. Okay. But I've since I retired, I've done a lot with the history, and all I have done for the last 22 years is work with non-profits. The Boys and Girls Club of the Ozarks, I've been chairman of the board of that. The Skaggs Hospital in Branson, I was chairman of the board of that. And so many other things I've done, all charity-wise, because I feel I've been so blessed in my life, considering the way it started, that I kind of owe it to Bradleyville and Taney County to do what I can for them.
Yeah, give them back.
Yes.
And, And educational opportunities are vital.
They are, and now there's so much better now than it was. I mean, there's so many opportunities for kids nowadays. It's expensive, as we all know, but they got opportunities such as the community colleges, where I think you folks here work with them on their credits to pick the right ones. And a lot of the kids from Bradleyville have almost no money, but they do the A+ program. If they do well in high school, they can go almost free with that and Pell Grants. They can go to community colleges and also, I'm sure, work out arrangements with Missouri State and other schools. So it's much better now than it was.
And we get all kinds of students here, but it's no offense to students coming down from St. Louis and Kansas City and other urban areas, but it's when we help unload, during move-in weekend. Boy, it's the ones in the old Chevy with baling wire holding the and you can tell they come up and they have the students' belongings are minimal. There's no big screen TVs and stuff going in there, no gaming devices, and their stuff is packed up in
bags.
Well, not bags and cereal boxes from the local store. So that's the ones I really they are really.
And the parents are very proud that Janie is in college, and they're tickled to death. And in most cases, Janie will do well because she knows that it's expected of her, and it's a great opportunity for her or him. And it's a different world now. Also, I don't know how. Sometimes I think the younger people are not as responsible as we were because things are made too easy for them. Because for me it was sink or swim. My mother and father didn't care whether I went to college or not. They were happy I decided to go, but they've been just as happy if I got a job. Different story.
I feel bad, like I'm a bad librarian, but I don't know how many books have you written.
Just two.
Okay.
Just two. Yeah, I did that.
Do you want to do any more? Or are you planning to do any more?
Everybody's asked me to do it again. I tell them, the writing is easy. Having something to write about is just a hard thing. Something that anybody would want to read. I can sit and write forever. In fact, I have a journal, a daily journal I keep on my laptop computer. I've written it almost every day since 1993.
Wow.
And one of my books is mainly excerpts from that. Memories, it's called Memoirs, from Bradleyville, growing up in Bradleyville. Just little kid stories about growing up in Bradleyville. And so I do enjoy writing, but writing, if you're a little bit lazy, you won't get any done, because writing takes a lot of work. I mean, thinking about what you're going to do and what would be of any value to anyone else.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if I have anything that anybody would want to know.
Well, don't delete your memoirs off your computer. So your daily. So you write almost every day. You do a lot.
Every day. I do every day.
Whatever you think of.
I do. I do, and I also I do this on just Microsoft Word, and I insert pictures. I have all kind of pictures from. If I want to know what I did on this date in 1997. I can find out in about 30 seconds. I go back and say.
So it's like a diary.
It's a diary.
That's what I was thinking about. This is what I was doing.
What I did, where I went today, what I happened. But sometimes when something eventful things happen, it's good to go back and look, see what happened.
Yeah.
My wife had a stroke 3 years ago. Sometimes we start talking about it. I said, okay, look, I go back and here's what happened at 10 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, and 1 o'clock, and so it's detailed.
And actually, I thoroughly doing the Woodruff book was a lot of work. But it was joyful work because I really enjoyed it.
Yes.
And I also felt, I sort of had a chip. I felt that he deserved more to be remembered.
Yeah.
It just kind of irked me that a lot of people who should have known didn't know all that he did for this region. And so I was kind of driven a little bit. Then I got into it, and it's like, I thought I was writing an article initially.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and now it's 30 pages, and now I got to do more of this, and then I found out about this and this and this, and talking to people, and so it ended up being like 300 pages long. But
it's I'm looking forward to reading it, and I know what you mean, because once you get into it, I did the same thing with my basketball book. it grabs you, and you think about it all the time, and how you're going to do this, and a lot, you can tell the story of this man. There are 1,000 different ways to tell that story.
Yeah.
And how you tell the story makes the book.
But I don't think anybody else has told it, so I guess I've got first dibs.
Right.
First dibs.
And that's what happened to me with the Bradleyville Hicks Mistakes book.
Yeah.
My brother Joe, who was superintendent of schools, he said, wow.
That's coming down, yeah.
He said, nobody's ever written about the great basketball team in the 1960s. Yeah. And I said, well, I thought about that. Because with a journalism degree, I thought, I should write something. So I started on that, and what I enjoyed most is interviewing the people, interviewing the players and the coaches, and going to the other cities, the other towns who had played Bradleyville in the state championship, and get their take on it. I mean, that was the best way to. to get the real take on what kind of team it was.
Yeah.
And see, Bradleyville had a 64-game winning streak. They beat everybody, including all the big Springfield schools. They had 75 students at school.
Yeah.
They beat everybody, won the state championship 3 times, won the blue and gold. In fact, this year, on December 29th, blue and gold tournament's going to recognize and honor Bradleyville.
Really?
The 50th anniversary of them winning the tournament that year and the next year.
So Bradleyville went from not being able to win a single game, not even having an indoor court.
They went from that to beating everybody. They became the talk of the state.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody. They won everything and beat everybody. And the story is, as you see in the book here, is just the story is that the guys didn't take themselves seriously. They would coon hunt all night. They'd drag race, and the coach would have to yell at them. They'd be up all night before a state championship game, goofing off, and drive their coach crazy. But they didn't have AAU ball in the summertime. And in the summertime, they were working in the hayfields or fishing or hunting or whatever. But
they just enjoyed playing.
Once I got into it and got the interview, but what I started to say is I talked to these other teams at New Haven or one of the perennial winners.
Yeah.
They said, we just had a bad night when we played Bradleyville. I said, almost everybody had a bad night. A good team will make you have a bad night.
Yeah.
So and they beat everybody and they did it without. They always won the sportsmanship award too. There's ever a sportsmanship award awarded, they always won it, except for the last game, the last big game of their 64-game winning streak. In the book, it tells about the school they played, Howardville, at Columbia, and they went into 4 overtimes to win the game, to win the state championship.
Wow.
And it was an all-black school from southeast Missouri. Great kids, 2 big 6'6" guys, which was huge back in those days.
Yeah.
And they won the game. And then the end, the officials came to the coach and said, we're going to award the sportsmanship trophy to Howardville. And all the guys at Bradleyville said, that's great. They deserve it because they were great sportsmen and they had a heck of a game. So yeah, it was fun to write that book.
Anybody ever expressed an interest in making this into a film?
I've had several people. I got started getting calls as soon as it came out, and I've had 2 or 3 people do screenplays on it, or try to, and I've got someone right now who is spending some time. Les Garland, who is a co-founder of MTV, and he is working on it right now with some people he knows to get a screenplay written. It's not an easy story to tell because it's spread over so many years. Yeah. There's not a protagonist and antagonist in it like a typical story. Yeah. You'd have to kind of create that.
You gotta have a love interest too.
Yes, you'd have to. and that's true, and there were plenty of those, but I didn't write too much about them. Like some of the girls got pregnant before they got out of school. But anyhow, it was a great story to write, and I think they may make a movie of it one of these days. I've had 2 or 3 people say the Hoosiers movie sort of preempted it, but this is truly a better story than the Hoosiers. Yeah. I mean, it's truly a better story, and not because I wrote it, because the story was there. I just put down what was there.
And Hoosiers have been out for what, 20 years or so?
Or longer, 30 probably. Yeah.
I mean, they'll recycle the same darn movie. They'll do a remake, and
for a long time, it was the #1 sports movie of all time. Yeah. It's had more tickets are sold or whatever.
Well, maybe to wrap up, I didn't grow up in the Ozarks, but I'm just enamored by the Ozarks and very, always surprised and impressed by Ozarks history and culture. But for a lot of people, the Ozarks and Ozarkers are, lazy, shiftless, backward people. But whether it's business or sports, athletics, or music, I mean, the music and musicians who have come out of this region are, on a per capita basis, has to beat just about every other place on the planet Earth. Yeah. There's a lot of talent and there's a lot of hard work. They work hard to achieve what they've achieved. What are your thoughts about sort of the Ozarks the myth versus Ozarks the reality?
I think a lot of that has been embellished by the advertising of the hillbilly or the old corncob pipe. Yeah. And a lot of the Branson shows or the toothless singers and so forth. Right. There are a lot of good, hardworking, intelligent people. And I've said this all along. These people, whether they're rural country, rural here or Iowa, their IQs are probably on par with the kids in the city. It's just happened they happen to be born there,
Right.
and they've in an environment where they are not as stimulated as you would be if you're raising. And St. Louis. My kids went to private schools in St. Louis because that's where they were born and raised. But they're hardworking people. Of course, every community, even the Ozarks, has its community of people who don't work. I mean, there are some people who will forever be on food stamps, and that happens here too. But the main mass of people are hardworking, very honest people. My word is my bond. We don't need a contract. If I'm going to lease my pastor to you for 5 years, here's what we'll do. We'll shake hands on it, and then we don't need to write it down. And everybody abides by it. But that's something that you don't see too often when you get into more populated areas. I mean, there's trust in people, and people know which families you can trust, which ones you can't trust.
Yeah.
You know, to borrow your tractor. There's some people you loan your tractor to, and because they'll take good care of it, and others will trash it and tear it up.
Right.
So there are good people, and I thank goodness that I was adopted and taken from California and taken to Bradleyville, despite its backwardness, and given an opportunity to taste the earth and swim in the creeks, and then come from there to wherever I've been since then.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. We've been speaking with Leon Combs, who's had a wide variety of experiences in his life, and it's not over yet.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks
I'm
very
81 years old and still going.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.